This is the tragic, heartbreaking story of Robert Mochrie and his family. See, Robert, he took his wife's life, then he took the life of his children, and then he took his own life. But he did not leave a note. He did not leave any words to suggest why he did what he did. So in this video, I'm going to tell you the story, and together I want us to try and come up with some reasons on what you think his motivations were in him doing something so heinous. So if you do end up liking this video, please subscribe. Follow me on Instagram, and I do have a second channel. All the links are in the description. So after Robert takes the life of his wife and his kids, he got on with a few things. He wrote a note for the milkman that morning, and he said no milk until Friday. He took a mop and cleaned a bit of blood that sprayed on the wall behind his 16-year-old daughter Sean's bed, whilst he slaughtered her to death. He pulled a duvet cover to cover up the heads of James, who was 18, Luke, who was 14, and Catherine, his wife, in a way to comfort them in their sleep, to make their life, the taking of their life, more dignified. Mop it. You want dignity? Don't do it in the first place. Then at 5:30 a.m., he phoned the school bus driver, and he informed the bus driver that his 10-year-old daughter, the youngest, Bethany, would not be in school that day. Around noon that same day, he sends a text message from his wife's phone to her best friend Debbie, and he said that I need to cancel our parent-teacher association meeting today. In the message, speaking on behalf of his wife, he says, "My mother's ill. I can't go. Why don't we speak tomorrow?" Finally, he let Brandy, the family boxer, loose and let the cat out. And then sometime on that July 12th summer day, or in the hours of darkness that followed, he decided he would swallow a concoction of slug pellets, weed killer, and paracetamol. He removed the cover to the loft hatch, put a plastic bag over his head, took some electrical flex, made a noose, and surrounded now by his dead family, jumped freely into death. Robert wanted to prevent any outsider interfering in his killing of his family, and he was successful. He was too successful. It took 11 days for the bodies to be discovered. They were eventually discovered on the evening of July 23rd, 2000. He left behind no note, no clue as to why he would slaughter his own family. The Mochries lived at 43 Rutland Close, on the Highlight Estate on the outskirts of Barry, a gently shabby seaside resort cum port that is part of Cardiff's greater conurbation. Outwardly, the Mochries, who had been married for around 23 years, were no different than any other family in their neighbourhood. The family lived in a £250,000 5-bedroom detached house at the end of a cul-de-sac. Robert, who was 49, was a former civil servant turned small businessman who had run a successful nightclub and now owned a small hotel. Catherine, who was 45, was a secretary of the local parent-teacher association. She was a housewife and a mature student who had just completed a degree in philosophy and sociology at Cardiff University. Philosophy and sociology, that's a lot of work. That's a lot of essays. Their two oldest children were at a sixth form college. Now, just to give you context with sixth form, in the British schooling system, once you complete your GCSEs, or in America, once you complete high school, you have the option to go to a community college, as they call it in America, or to stay at the high school for 2 more years, completing, your community college or an associate's degree basically, and then going on to do your bachelor's at university. That's not quite exactly right, but just consider it that way. James, one of the sons, although he didn't know it, he had actually completed his A-levels and got a place at Bristol University where he could study law. In the meantime, he was concentrating on the guitar with the band he had formed with his friends in school. His sister Sean had also done well in her GCSEs. 14-year-old Luke was a fanatical Manchester United supporter, and he was an avid snooker player. Robert and Luke would often watch the soccer games on TV. And again, for those that don't know, snooker is just another form of pool. Now, when he was 8, Luke had suffered some life-threatening illnesses where he had a brain tumor that left him with minor learning difficulties. Beethan, who was autistic and was attending a special needs school, was a ray of sunshine but also a real handful, whose favourite activity was walking Brandy around the estate. 43 Rutland Close was a noisy, gregarious household with lots of teenage comings and goings. The Mochries weren't saints. Sometimes they would shout at the kids for being untidy or playing loud music in their bedroom. They shared responsibility when it came to cooking and the school run, but Catherine did most of this work. Their lives were filled with never-ending demands of family, school, and employment. Socially, Catherine and Robert were quite reserved. In public, they really showed affection. But then again, most couples, when you've been together for over 5, 10, 15, 20 years, 23 years in this case, most of them, the affection level goes down. Their friends did say that they were both supportive of each other. Robert told his friend one time when his wife graduated as a mature student that Robert was very, very proud of Catherine. When the police interviewed the neighbors, the one word they would use to describe the Mochrie family was that they were normal. Debbie, who I mentioned earlier, was one of Catherine's best friends. She said Catherine loved her children and she loved her husband. Describing Rob, Debbie said that Rob did have some mental issues maybe, but he was very, very good at hiding them. Rob was always in his own little world. Now, I can relate to being in your own little world. I generally am, right? I'm always internalizing my thoughts and I very, very rarely express how I feel in real life. I like to keep it to myself, figure it out myself. So I don't think Mochrie being in his own little world is so much of a mental issue per se. After the discovery of the bodies, newspapers everywhere carried a copy of Catherine's graduation picture. Grinning in her gown and mortarboard, she was photographed surrounded by her children and her husband. It was a snap of the archetypal happy middle-class family of ambitions, albeit late fulfilled. No one can remember a sign, an argument, a portent of what was to come. On Sunday, the 23rd of July 2000, 11 days after Robert left his note for the milkman, the outside world at last broke into Robert Mochrie's mausoleum at 43 Rutland Close. Debbie at the time was mystified in the cryptic text message that she received from Catherine, as well as the unanswered calls ever since. Over the next 10 days, Debbie went around the house several times, knocking on the door to no answer. She told the police it just felt still. Debbie said the house was always full of life, always vibrant with people coming in and coming out. Now it seems abandoned. Debbie, who was 40 years old, whose children were the same ages as the Mochries, regarded Catherine as a sister. Debbie and Catherine would speak every day. They were very close. And Debbie was the last person who spent time with Catherine on July the 10th before her life was taken the next day. Catherine did what she always did the last time she saw Debbie. She gave her a hug, she gave her a kiss, and she said, "I'll see you tomorrow." The night before, Robert had driven both women into Cardiff, 45 minutes away, for a graduation party, and then later left home to pick them up from Barry train station. Debbie said that Robert was laughing and joking. She remembers her last words to Robert. She said to Robert, "You are my angel." Debbie said that the families were close. Robert was a good friend, a good man, a loving husband. Rob was one of the least aggressive men that I knew. He was quiet, not the most sociable of people. Telephone conversations were impossible, long silences, that sort of thing. That was Rob. And beyond his family circle, Rob had few friends in life. His social entertainment amounted to just having a few pints at the local pub, occasionally watching the rugby. He was shy, but not a social misfit. He had held down a senior position at the Welsh office and had run a number of different businesses. Another family of the friend, Chris Williams, he went on to say that we are all at a loss on why this happened. Robert would not hurt a fly. By Sunday, July the 3rd, Debbie began to become concerned because her children reported to her that James, one of the children of Robert, had not hung out with them in a while, and none of them could reach Sean. Debbie then went round to the house and she began to notice things. She began to notice a smell and a whole bunch of flies. She then thought to herself, I'm going to go look at the garage. And when she did, that's when she knew. See, the Mochries never put their car in the garage. It was always in the drive. With the aid of a friend, Debbie used a ladder to climb up to the upstairs window. And on the bed, in Luke's bedroom, they saw a weird shape and they immediately called the police. And when the police broke in, they found a house of horrors. Downstairs was untouched, a normal messy family home with a sprawl of teenage trainers in the hallway and James' guitar resting against the sitting room wall. But upstairs, the smell was overwhelming. The bodies were in an advanced state of decomposition. Each of the Mochrie children had their own bedroom, and each of them was found dead, lying face down on their beds. Catherine was found in the same position on the right-hand side of the bed that she shared with Robert. All of the bodies were in their nightclothes. The heat and decomposition made the exact cause of death and the exact nature of the murder weapon difficult to determine, and the weapon itself was never found. Each victim had been struck on the head 2 or 3 times with a heavy, blunt instrument, possibly a slate hammer. A knife was found under the bed of James' room, and that knife had the other children's blood on it. And this could have suggested that James was probably the last to have his life taken. It was hard to tell if they had all been stabbed, but Robert himself was found wearing a red t-shirt and trousers, and he was found hanging over the upstairs landing. And Catherine's graduation picture, it showed that James was nearly 6 foot, and his 14-year-old brother Luke, both him and James were taller than the 5'8" Robert. But there were no injuries to suggest that they defended themselves, no blows to the forearms, which would have been raised instinctively. Like if somebody's trying to hit you, doing this is just normal, and an impact could have caused like a mark over here. There was no signs of a struggle. It was not mayhem or a bloodbath, says Detective Inspector Paul Bethel, the leading investigator in the case. It's methodical. It's controlled, managed. He used some degree of pre-planning. Picture the scene. The house is in darkness. The house is silent and he's walking around. He goes from room to room. He strikes each of them with a blow or blows to their head. He then covers them with the duvet. It's a strange act. Why is he covering them? And I think covering them was one, him avoiding looking at their face. He felt ashamed of what he did potentially. He couldn't live with the guilt. And there probably was some element of dignity where he thought, well, you know, may they rest in peace, and maybe he put their eyes down. I don't know. But at this point, I'm thinking to myself, you did this, in my opinion, out of financial hardship, or there was something going on in the family. There was a burden that you couldn't bear. So you wanted to take their life, but because you couldn't live with taking their life, you were weak. You were pathetic that you decided to take your own. Now, of course, what I'm saying is pure speculation, but that is the point of the video where I asked you in the beginning, why did Robert do what he did? Well, I'm going to give you some more evidence now to suggest that perhaps finances, pride, ego, and public perception were the main motivations. The police went on to say that downstairs they found a mop and bucket that had been used to wipe the blood off the wall in one of the rooms. The mopping was a fascinating act, the police said. It wasn't the action of someone trying to clean up a crime scene, it was like tidying up. It wasn't trying to conceal anything, it's pointless. What is going through his mind? The inquest soon uncovered a web of family secrets. So Robert, he was known to be quite a successful businessman. I mean, back then in 2000, 5-bedroom, £250,000 home, mate, you're living life. In the city of Barry, that's a lot of money. The teenagers themselves, they had CD players and televisions in their rooms. But beneath the camouflage of affluence and money, Robert was facing bankruptcy. In 1994, having left the civil service, he bought a rundown hotel in Barry with a number of business partners. He refurbished it and reopened the premises as a nightclub. He called it The Power Station. Now, I understand that this is quite a tragic, sad story, but mate, if you called the nightclub The Power Station, I could have told you myself you're going to go bankrupt, you muppet. The seaside resort attracts a good weekend crowd to Cardiff, and initially the club was a great success. In 97, the business was sold and Mochrie invested his profits into a 22-bedroom hotel in Haverford West, which is in West Wales. But Pembroke House Hotel was a disastrous business decision. Haverford West is a quiet rural community, and Robert's efforts to replicate the success of the power station fell flat. In January 1999, A fire in the kitchens closed the hotel down for good. There was a dispute with the insurers, who ultimately refused to pay out. Twice, Mochrie tried to sell the hotel, but he couldn't meet the price of £150,000. A financial millstone, it quickly exhausted his financial capital. From June 1999 until his death, £126,000 flowed out of Mochrie's business account, but there was only £138 left and another £600 in personal accounts. The Mochries were 2 months behind on their mortgage, and they had a whole bunch of outstanding bills. The police officer, Officer Bethel, he reported that at the time of their deaths, they were over £200,000 in debt. And of course, you can imagine the phone calls, the letters they would have received from the mortgage company and the utilities demanding payment. And despite their close friendship, Debbie, the friend of Catherine, she confirmed that Catherine never spoke to her about their financial hardships. And in fact, it was possible that Catherine wasn't even aware on the scale of the debts. The Mochries, they had traditional roles. Robert was the breadwinner and Catherine was the homemaker. But the Mochries, they kept other secrets from each other, secrets of a sexual kind. Catherine had a brief affair with one of her husband's employees, David Osborne, who was hotel manager at the doomed Pembroke House. At the inquest, he gave evidence that their affair had ended in February 2000, 5 months before her death. Catherine then began another relationship with a fellow pubgoer by the name of Paul Wyatt, whom she had met for coffee on the Monday before her death and text messaged at 10 minutes past midnight a few hours before her death. The message was hesitant, clandestine and suggestive of plans for a future liaison. "Couldn't call," she said. "Battery dead. Call later." "Paul, I've been there. When a woman says that to you, mate, you ain't getting the booty." Both of Catherine's affairs were nothing more than a casual sex fling. Consider them an extended one-night stands. There was no evidence to ever suggest that she planned on leaving her husband. According to Osborne, who knew the couple well and occasionally house sat for them, Robert Mochrie never indicated any knowledge of his wife's infidelity. But Robert's own sexual infidelity was far more intriguing. When Catherine's graduation photograph was published in the local South Wales Echo, following the discovery of the bodies, police were contacted by a Cardiff prostitute, Charmaine Jacobs. Charmaine Jacobs claimed that each of her encounters with Robert, she would charge him £50. £50 for a shag? You can have a wank and it's free. It was said that every Tuesday and or every Thursday at around 7 p.m, Robert drove his wife's Renault Clio to Penarth Road for sex. He'd pick Charmaine up, go to like a local industrial estate because those areas are quite secluded, pay her £50, and then, well, she would tug his penis on the chair. "All I would do is a hand job," Charmaine said. £50 for a hand job? That's worse. That's what I told him at the start, and he accepted that. After he had had his relief, he would clean himself up and then talk. She said that she liked him as a friend. He would always talk, he was always clean, and he smelled very nice. Mochrie never told Charmaine his last name, but she learned a lot of things about his family. She knew that he owned hotels, he had a mentally handicapped daughter, and that the kids loved playing music. He talked about his marriage, saying that there were problems and him and Catherine were not having sex anymore. Charmaine, she estimated that their encounters lasted around 20 minutes. Wow, that's 18 minutes more than me. Charmaine claimed that she met with Robert on the evening of Tuesday, July the 11th, just hours before Robert started his killing spree. "It was pissing down with rain and at first he drove past me," is what Charmaine said. "I flagged him down, then he came back to me in his car and then we went to our usual location." Charmaine did say though that Robert was more quiet that night than what he normally was. As a police officer, I would have thought quiet when you're tugging him or quiet in general. Because if he's quiet when you're tugging him, give that guy a refund. See, Robert's crime is known as familicide, and it's rare, but not so very rare. See, the file on familicide could and does run back through human history to the Greeks and beyond. In an average year in Britain, around 700 men, women and children are currently the victims of homicide. A detailed Home Office analysis of murder victims and their relationships to their killers, published in 1997, found that 68% of all female victims were killed either by their spouse or another family member. In fact, 75 to the 80 children whose lives are taken every year in Britain are done by their parents. And the most significant stress factor for this is family breakup and male sexual jealousy. And this is why I said earlier that he was weak and he was pathetic. See, aside from his overwhelming financial problems, Robert Mochrie may have become fixated by the medical problems and learning difficulties suffered by his two youngest children, Luke and Bethan. And I think we can all agree, when your child is suffering in any way, small or big, it's gonna burn you. It's gonna hurt a lot. It's gonna hurt a lot more than, even if your wife or your husband is feeling pain, because that relationship with the child is a different level of love altogether. And this would have made Robert feel inadequate. Am I a good enough father? Am I doing good enough taking care of them? They're feeling pain because of me. He probably blamed himself. But the answer to that is to take their life. See, in the mind of a filicidal parent, vulnerable children provide a further justification for the extension of their own suicide to other family members. Worried about what will happen to their children after their death, they convince themselves that it would be better to take the children with them. So let's break that down a little bit more. Robert essentially became depressed. Financial hardship, his businesses went down the tank, and he knew he couldn't provide his children the life that they had become accustomed to. But he wanted to take his own life. However, the guilt of leaving them with nothing was too much for him to bear, so his genius mind decided, well, I'll take them with me. You could make an argument that his actions were done out of selfishness. I don't think selfishness is the right word, but I don't think selfishness gives you that guttural punch. Like, it's not strong enough to describe what he did, you know what I mean? Probably more significant is Robert Mochrie's own past history of stress-related mental illness, a history that kept him hidden even from his wife. In 1990, while he was still a civil servant, he actually went to see a psychiatrist. He suffered from sleeplessness, loss of weight, fatigue, and low mood. Robert, with his psychiatrist, openly admitted that he had suicidal thoughts, and sometimes at work, it felt as if somebody put a gun to his head and pulled the trigger. See, if Mochrie was mentally ill, then it was an illness that was invisible to everyone that knew him. But some anxiety, which probably came from financial hardship and the crashing of his business, this anxiety grew inside of him, blotting out all possibility of a future. He saw no means of escape. He gave up, and the facade of a happy family life came crashing down. And the only way in his disturbed mind to turn this around was to destroy the family he loved, even as he prowled the house in darkness, moving from room to room, killing as he went. Robert Mochrie still thought of himself the loving dad he had always been. He loved his children in life, and he loved them in death. The text message and the mop were just the last details in a life of anxious, banal parental love, where we rightly see murder, brutality, and horror. Robert Mochrie saw something else. He saw salvation. And it sounds weird, right? Salvation, vindication. Maybe the word is damnation. So I think we can conclude that he did act because he felt inadequate. He had lost his self-confidence. His ego had been hurt. He looked at his kids and he was like, I done fucked up, and I can't give you this life anymore. And it burned him. And I get all of that. I understand all of that. 100%. If you can't provide for your kids, there is no worse feeling for a man. You know, as a father, people ask me, like, I'm a father, right? I have a 2-year-old son. People ask me, how are you doing? I say, I'm fine. I mean, nobody asks because nobody gives a shit. But when people say, how are you, Cam? I say, yeah, I'm good. What they don't know is I'm stressed. What they don't know is I worry, is this YouTube video, are these YouTube videos good enough? What they don't know is that I worry about providing for my son every single day. What people don't know is that the things that go through my head are pain and suffering from the past that I use to fuel my future. I use it as a means of motivation. I have failed before and I will fail again, but I learned quickly that failure is what gives you process. In the case of Robert, failure gave him nothing. Failure gave him damnation. Failure closed his eyes. All he could see was blank. He couldn't see down the tunnel. And whenever he looked at his children and he knew that it was all slowly coming to an end. Just imagine in his head, right? Just imagine we're going to lose our house. We're going to lose our cars. I've got nowhere to live. I've got no one else I can turn to. The way he's going to feel about his children, social status, pride, ego, self-worth. You understand the picture I'm painting, right? But we can all agree that's not a fucking excuse to take their life. And I don't have any words to describe at that moment. I've told stories and you know stories where the perpetrator, the suspect, he's used a hammer or a knife or something. It's one thing to think something. It's another thing to go through it. See, intention is everything, but intention with action, that's responsibility. And it just boggles me how, despite having these heinous, awful thoughts of wanting to take the life of your children, how people like Robert can still go through with it. Why don't you guys comment? Tell me what you think.